Norman Robinson, and welcome to Affordable Housing Matters. Beginning a new year means new plans, new places, and new opportunities. On today's show, we will visit with two organizations whose mission is to create equal and fair opportunities for all residents of New Orleans. We have a great show planned for you today, so don't go far.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Oh boy.
Our back and forth. It always came back.
Dad!
You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
The Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center is a nonprofit civil rights organization established in 1995 to eradicate housing discrimination. And joining me now to discuss their continued fight is Mr. Maxwell Giardulo, Director of Policy and Communications at the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center. Welcome, Mr. Giardulo.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good to have you here. What's on your mind today?
Well, there's a lot of things that we could talk about. I wanted to briefly share a little bit about our 16th annual Fit for a King conference, which just happened this month. This is our annual tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King and the legacy of the civil rights movement. And
Quite timely.
Yeah, and their actions in really creating the Fair Housing Act, which drives all of our work. And so this year, our theme was about really connecting housing inequity and health inequity. We had a great keynote speaker, Miss Linda Villarosa, who is a reporter and researcher who was one of the first people who really started breaking the story about the incredible disparity in birth outcomes for Black women. And how those outcomes really sustained despite sort of class or educational level. So people are familiar, I think, with the stories of like Beyonce or Serena Williams and the complications that they had despite the fact that they have tons of money. And that's true. You know, for when you compare birth outcomes for Black women, even with you know, high incomes and high educational levels, they are worse than in many cases white women who are working class and don't have college degrees. And so she was one of the first people to sort of break that story, and we talked about the sort of toxic stress of racism and how housing plays a big piece of that. And we know that because across the country, and certainly here in New Orleans, it's always Black women who are most likely to be evicted.
To what degree is that hampering what you're trying to do, or what I should say we are trying to do when it comes to fair housing?
But we think it's a really big issue, and it's one of the things that we focused on both in at the summit, but also in our work. And so that was one of the things I was excited to talk to you about. Is over the past year, we really ramped up our campaign for healthy homes, and that's because for years, this is something we've been working on for over a decade. We receive all these phone calls from people who are stuck in homes with leaks, rats, mold, all sorts of terrible, dangerous health conditions, air conditioners that are broke over, you know, peak times in the summer. And for a long time, we've had nothing to refer people to. We've had no way to help because our code enforcement system here is not super functional.
That's putting it in a very nice way.
I was trying to be nice.
Mr. Giardulo, you're being very nice there.
And then also, you know, we're one of only a handful of states where if you call in a violation, if you act as a whistleblower, as a renter, and say there's a serious health violation in my building, you can be evicted for that. And so there are very few protections. And so we worked with a lot of other organizations and built a big coalition this last year to try and create a new system here in New Orleans, a proactive system of health and safety inspections where larger and corporate landlords would have to face a regular inspection the way that restaurants do.
And so how much of that are you getting accomplished?
Well, it's a good question. So I think I'm really proud of the coalition we built, and we had hundreds of people who turned out or contacted their council members about this. But unfortunately, the council members also listened to the landlord and real estate lobbies, and so we did not get a proactive inspection program passed. What we got instead was some basic protections against retaliation for renters who do act as whistleblowers in those scenarios. You do sort of have to do everything right. You have to make sure you're current on rent and not in violation of your lease in any other way. But if you do that, there will be protections in place starting next summer for people who call in a complaint or are willing to speak up about something like that.
So at least you've got that done.
That's something. It's a start.
That's a step.
That's right.
That's a step in the right direction.
It's a step that most other states have already taken, but we're going to get there eventually.
So what do we do about these? I saw several stories on TV newscasts, local television newscasts, about people who are stuck in apartment complexes that are just barely fit for human habitation.
Yeah.
Who champions those people stuck in those kind of situations?
Well, I'm really excited that your next guests are going to be from Jane Place Neighborhood Sustainability Initiative, because they've done a ton of work around this and organizing tenants in those buildings. We try and help where we can. The other folks who often take those cases in the legal realm is Southeast Louisiana Legal Services, which is our local legal aid provider. And you're right, I think the big buildings make the news, but I think it's also important to note that these sorts of issues happen in a lot of smaller buildings. And most of the rental properties in New Orleans are in buildings that are 4 units or less, right? We're not a city with tons of big apartment complexes, and there are slumlords who own those small buildings too.
Yeah, it's only in recent years that we're hearing about the dilapidated apartment complexes, because they've reached their zenith, for lack of a better word. They've reached their zenith of habitability. You know, and I didn't know that when these complexes were developed, you know, the life expectancy and as far as their sustainability was 5 to 15 years.
Well, it depends on the sort of how well they were developed and the construction materials and sort of what sort of regular maintenance is happening. With a lot of these buildings, I mean, there is a slumlord business model, which is to put zero money into your building and maintaining it, even if it goes through multiple storms, hurricanes, whatever, and just suck out as much rental income as possible. And so that's very different from a responsible developer who's doing regular maintenance, regular management of a building.
So yeah, we're going to be talking to Mr. Russell Moran, who's with Jane Place Neighborhood Sustainability Initiative, about that in depth coming up. Thank God he's here.
That's right.
Now let's jump on another subject that's been a burning issue for many neighborhoods, and that is STRs.
Yes.
Short-term rentals.
Right.
Where are we in regard to protecting neighborhoods against the encroachment of short-term rentals and their particular problems?
Yeah, I think we've got a long way to go, and I think if you talk to anyone who lives in the city, they'll tell you that. And this is something that the Fair Housing Action Center has always cared about, because we care about the displacement that happens when long-term renters are removed in order so that speculators can make more money renting to tourists. And we've seen the devastation that this has wrought specifically in historically black neighborhoods near the French Quarter. So Central City, Treme, 7th Ward, St. Roch. These neighborhoods have been really devastated in the past couple years because we've done very little enforcement of the laws that were on the books. The city's really failed in that regard. And then very recently, I'm sure people have seen this in the news, but the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals struck down our current law, and so we are having to revamp it again, and again having to fight back against these speculators who want to come in, buy up more properties, raise their neighbors' property taxes, raise rents by renting to tourists.
Why would the Fifth Circuit make a distinction between what the city of New Orleans is doing and deference to what other cities are doing? They were doing the same thing that you were trying to accomplish here, but somehow the Fifth Circuit saw a distinction. Why do you think that is? Yeah,
it's a really good question. You're right that there are a lot of other cities that have regulated short-term rentals in the same way that we have, and the particular piece that they took issue with was that we had required that if you wanted to rent a short-term rental in a neighborhood, in a residential area, you had to live on the property and own the property and be a homeowner. I don't find a lot of logic in most of what the Fifth Circuit does, so I'm not sure I'm the best person to explain to you why they decided to do that, but it has really caused a lot of conflict and confusion.
So what's your approach now?
Yeah, so for us, we don't see much value in Airbnbs outside of the central business district, where we already have the infrastructure to cater to tourists, and honestly, where most of them want to be, near the French Quarter. There's been some really good research that has shown that, especially in black and brown neighborhoods, Airbnb guests don't contribute to economic development. They don't actually spend their money in those neighborhoods. And if you look at the reviews of Airbnbs in the Treme, the 7th Ward, Central City, there's a lot of coded racist language about how the neighborhood is ghetto or sketchy, and then there's a lot of advice about how it's just a quick Uber ride to the French Quarter.
Let's talk about the coded racist language. Give me a breakdown on that.
I mean, I think there's just, a lot of the tourists who come here, they're not interested in the deep historic, cultural traditions of the city. We're a weird Vegas-style, party town for them. And so it's not surprising to me that those folks are not showing much respect to our historic black neighborhoods. And it doesn't make any sense to me why we would create laws that then invite more of them here.
What about the senior citizens who've been around for a while and they're still trying to make ends meet, and they use their property as a means of helping out with their mortgage, and they say that this is helpful to us, and it doesn't matter whether the B&Bs or the Airbnbs or the STRs are in the French Quarter or not, or wherever they are. They're helping us boost our income so that we can meet our mortgage requirements.
Yeah, I think that's something we've heard a lot of, and we did some looking into that. We talked to lenders and we talked to realtors in the area, and they said, it's impossible to get a loan, to get a mortgage based on the short-term rental income you might make on your property. They will only qualify you for that loan based on the long-term rental income, and not even the entire long-term rental income, only about 75% of it. So they build a cushion in there on purpose to make sure if taxes go up or if insurance costs go up, you've got a little bit of a cushion. Now, we've also seen long-term rent increase by 20-25% in the past year. Rents have been skyrocketing. So we would say, those folks who are, want some help making their mortgage should rent to our residents. You can make quite a lot of money renting to long-term residents right now. And when you're doing that, you're also not, raising the rents and property taxes of your neighbors, because that's the other collateral damage that happens in that neighborhood, right? Maybe this is good for an individual, but it's not good for their neighbors, and it's certainly not good for the neighborhood or the city as a whole.
How much of a factor is that when we talk about, because I hear that a lot, increasing the property value and thereby increasing the tax base, which also kicks out long-term citizens.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. And that's the other thing that's important to note is that the number of people who actually live here and are running like a small Airbnb is minuscule. Most of these properties are run by sort of large speculators or corporate investors who swoop in, and they're not getting mortgages. They buy properties.
Or people with money who live elsewhere and use this as a.
They buy properties with cash,
income.
and they buy it above market, above the asking price, and that raises everyone's taxes and the cost of actually affording a home in these neighborhoods.
Well, thanks for being there, and thanks for looking out for us, and we'll see you next time here on Affordable Housing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Anytime. Coming up next, we continue the conversations on housing rights with an organization looking to transform unjust housing policies. More Affordable Housing Matters after this break, so don't go far.
Because of you, I felt hopeless.
I know it was a joke, but it still hurt me.
Because of you, I felt wanted and not alone in this world.
Because you said hi to me on the first day of school, I felt included, and I knew that I was going to be okay.
Jane Place Neighborhood Sustainability Initiative's mission is to transform unjust housing policies, discriminatory practices, and inequitable development schemes by engaging in strategies that create permanently affordable housing. Joining me now to discuss how they accomplish this monumental feat, this task, is Mr. Frank Southall, Organizing and Community Engagement Manager, and Mr. Russell Moran, Advocacy and Operations Manager at Jane Place. Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
We are about to embark on a subject that is near and dear to my heart. But first of all, I want you to each explain to our viewing audience what it is that you do according to your role. We'll start with Mr. Moran.
Sure, yeah. So I'm the Advocacy and Operations Manager at Jane Place. I kind of oversee our advocacy research projects around evictions, short-term rentals, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And Mr. Southall?
I coordinate our organizing community engagement strategies as well as our public education strategies around evictions, short-term rentals, and other issues related to housing justice.
Mm-hmm. And why is it called Jane Place Initiative?
So it was founded on the little street mid-city named Jane Place 14 years ago by a group of activists who were living in this apartment complex. And they literally lived on the street named Jane Place.
Apartment complexes, that's what I want to start with. That is the subject that is near and dear to my heart, because it breaks my heart to see the conditions under which our tenants are living in these apartment complexes where the landlords seem to be deaf to their cries for help. So what does Jane's Place do to champion those residents who are seemingly caught in a morass of dilapidation and in conditions that just, to me, are inhumane?
So as Russell mentioned, we conduct research on issues facing tenants. We have a multi-pronged approach. We do the research, we push for better policy, we advocate, we organize tenants, and then we also do education about tenant rights. So we take a multi-pronged approach in part because our state has some of the worst tenant laws in the country. So we have to kind of do it all to ensure that we get better outcomes for tenants in our city.
And you talk about community engagement. That's a big hurdle to jump over in terms of community engagement, because a lot of people are just beaten down. They don't really believe that there's anybody out there who cares about what they're going through. Yes. So what kind of challenge is it under those circumstances to affect some kind of community engagement?
It's huge. As she mentioned, people feel beat up, they feel let down, and so we employ a range of strategies to let the community know we're there. So, for example, we do outreach at bus stops. We go to the transfer station by the public library once a week to let people know about the city's Right to Counsel program, which enables them to have access to an attorney if they're facing any housing issues for free. As well as we try to outreach to our most vulnerable tenants in different employment sectors. So once a week we go to a bar and we do outreach on a Tuesday or Monday or Wednesday to try to reach out to service industry workers. And then this year, we're partnering with schools to share with them our tenant education work, do our Know Your Rights trainings, both in English, Spanish, and we're hoping in 2024 to be able to do a training in Vietnamese. But we're just trying to employ any strategy, canvassing, just to reach people. Because people, if they know about their rights, even though our state has really terrible tenant laws, people are empowered and they can take action against any substandard treatment they're facing.
And while Mr. Southall is engaged in the community organizing aspect of Jane's Place, what are you doing, Mr. Moran, in terms of strategy and policy?
Sure. So we, for the last couple of years, have been running an eviction court monitoring project. We use that to kind of figure out who's coming through eviction court, why they're there, and sort of the sorts of things that we can do to help tenants know about their rights. And as Frank was saying, with the Right to Counsel program last year, tenants have free access to legal assistance and also representation in eviction court. So one of the big things that we've been doing is using that research to kind of figure out which neighborhoods to try to reach out to let folks know, because one of the biggest things that we're seeing there is that folks just don't know about the process involved with an eviction, and especially like don't know about the assistance that they can receive.
So what are you telling them when they query you or ask questions about what they should be doing in terms of what their rights are and how to handle an eviction notice?
Absolutely. The first thing we tell tenants, the biggest thing is to go to your hearing. If you don't go to your hearing, you could end up with an eviction automatically on your record. So the first step in preventing that is just being in court. The second thing is to reach out to Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. They're the legal aid providers who are doing the free legal assistance in partnership with the court in the city. So
do they need to have legal representation at that eviction hearing, is what you're saying?
You don't need to, but now it's offered for free. So there's really no reason not to, and the legal representation really affects the possibility of a better court outcome. You know,
on your webpage, you say that we believe everyone has a right to safe, accessible, healthy, and affordable homes. So let me ask you, is that possible in the city of New Orleans?
I would like to believe that it is. You know, I think that that's one of the things that we're continuing to fight up against, along with some of our community partners, like your previous guests from Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center and Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. Yeah, doing what we can to like advocate for tenants and kind of get the rights that we have here in Louisiana to look a little bit better like some other states around. You know.
You were talking about Mr. Giardullo,
yes, correct,
who was here earlier, and he talked about the fact that the apartment complexes are minuscule as opposed to the the regular landlord who has a fourplex or a duplex. How do you differentiate the challenge between those two, dealing with the large apartment complexes and the smaller landlords who seem to be as much of a problem as if not more?
I think one of the things that we've noticed in our research is that most of the multifamily apartment buildings we see in the city, in particular in the edges of the city in Algiers in the east, are owned by big investment firms based in New York, LA, London, you name it. And so there's not a level of accountability that comes when the owner of a property lives 1,000 miles away.
True.
So that was one of the things working in coalition with Maxwell and the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center, along with over 30 coalition partners to pass Healthy Homes. We want to ensure that the owners of these properties are known to the city. If you ask people who work for a city if they know exactly who owns this building, no one can give you a straight answer, because I've tried.
The city can't give you a straight answer?
For not every building, because of the way the shell companies work and how these owners are hidden. And that was one of the things about Healthy Homes. Even though we didn't get what we wanted this past fall, we're going to push to get the complete package, because when we talk with tenants in some of these buildings, they themselves don't really know who own these buildings. And so we want to ensure that everyone knows exactly who owns their building. And when we ensure that people know, or when we know who owns these buildings, we can get accountability when things go wrong. So that's the important piece.
Well, I do know something about policy, and that is that even though it's policy, you have to have some kind of legislative leverage to go along with it. So how do you balance that, Mr. Moran? How do you balance this issue of policy and legislation?
Sure. I think what we've historically done at Jane Place is kind of, whether it's with these evictions or the short-term rental work that we do, spend time doing research, figuring out what we're seeing in either of these avenues and kind of what the issues are. And our goal is to kind of display that research to the city, to folks who live in the city, and also with it to kind of propose like suggestions that we think city council can take, the mayor can take, that sort of thing.
Who on the council do you consider an ally?
I think anyone can be a champion of housing if they commit to it, and so I think that's the thing we want to educate our
I know you don't want to
members.
make. I know you don't want to make any political enemies here, and I can understand that. But who do you consider that a person who has your ear?
I think J.P. Morale in his when he was running for a seat, he put up an excellent platform on housing issues. And so we've been working with him a lot, as Maxwell mentioned, around healthy homes. And so we know that he is interested in reforming short-term rentals because he's seen the impact and devastation. So, we're looking towards our at-large city council members. We know Leslie Harris wants to take action on short-term rentals. She's talked about living around them. I have friends who live in Central City and they've talked about the impact. And also we know Joe Geruso has ears of people in Lakeview. We've actually spoken to folks in Lakeview because everywhere in the city, I don't think I really have met a person in any neighborhood who's like, I want short-term rentals next to me. Generally, it's the minority of people, which Russell can talk more about the actual data. In our research, we found that it's 1% or less of the population that actually owns short-term rentals, and that's being generous.
Yeah.
So,
As we run out of time, Mr. Moran, you get the last word on short-term rentals.
Sure. As we were talking about that research-based advocacy, we released a paper earlier this week kind of detailing our findings, looking at the staggering number of legal Airbnbs that are operating in the city while City Council is about to make this big decision on how to change those regulations. So.
Well, gentlemen, thank you to both of you. I appreciate that you've given us a wealth of information.
Yeah.
And we'll be looking to talk to you again
Thanks so
in
much
the
for
not
having
too
us.
distant future.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. That would conclude our show today. I would like to again thank Mr. Southall, Mr. Moran, and also Mr. Ciardullo for joining us on our program today. And if you would like to watch or rewatch any of our past episodes, please click on the QR code located on your screen. And that will take you directly to the WLAE YouTube page where you can view this and many other programs at your leisure. I'm Norman Robinson, and we will see you next time on Affordable Housing Matters.